right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 10th episode of Adapt Revolution. We have a special guest with us tonight, Joan Ostrove, who is coming to us from McAllister and other places, I am sure. I am going to let Joan introduce herself here first, and then we'll get started with some questions.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Beth. I'm so honored to be on the Adapt Revolution podcast. This is awesome. Yep, I'm Joan Ostrove, and I live in St. Paul, Minnesota right now. I have lived here pretty much since 1999, when I started teaching at McAllister College. I grew up in New York, in a suburb of New York City, and have lived a bunch of other places in various parts of the United States since then, but pretty much lived here almost since 1999. I had a 4-year stint in California, and I teach psychology at McAllister College, and I currently run our Center for Scholarship and Teaching. So I think about like faculty life a lot at McAllister, and so that's some of who I am. Yeah.
That's great. And I know, Beth, you and Joan have known each other for a number of years. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have. I can't remember when we met.
Yeah. I'll bet it was about 10. My guess is it was about 10 years ago, I think, at Mount Zion Temple.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, and then you visited my class at McAllister,
right, to speak,
7 or 8 years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
So I'm interested to hear, Joan, from your perspective, what have you seen as sort of growing trends within the college system for accessibility, and what are your particular dreams for the Adapt Revolution? And feel free to really talk about anything that you'd like to that relates to that. But we're just really interested from everyone that comes on the show, to know, where do you see us going? What would you like to see happen in the world? That kind of thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's a great question about trends in accessibility and disability thinking and accommodation in higher ed. I mean, I think in some ways, like the kind of disability rights movement started related to higher ed, right? Like, oh my God, like the Berkeley Center for Independent Living and Ed Roberts, like totally transforming Berkeley's campus because he's like, dudes, you got to make this work for me. And just a lot of advocacy and fighting and whatever. And so higher ed is in some ways a place that, like revolution happens and advocacy happens, but it's also such a huge gatekeeper system, and it's such a huge place where all kinds of barriers and rules and entrance demands and whatever can be set up to make disability access really a big challenge. So I think there's been a lot of things that have changed over the years, and different schools are really, really different. There are some schools that have like tremendous disability access, both related to physical disability, sensory disabilities. And then there's other places where just like they would have no clue what to do and how to think about certain kinds of access. Obviously, the law is, the law is the law, and then there's actuality and attitudes and whatever. I would say at a place like McAllister, there are historically very, very, very few students, for example, or staff or faculty with mobility disability related issues. very, very rare. Not non-existent, but very rare. And yet now there's a huge number of students who have disability related accommodations. Almost a lot of them are related to mental health issues and neurodivergent issues like autism, ADHD, all kinds of learning disabilities. And so there's just really cool ways in which higher ed has transformed to make itself accessible and possible. Technology changes so many things. In some ways, it makes things way more accessible for people. In other ways, technology imposes barriers. And I'll just add one last thing that I've seen at Macalester is over the years, I mean, really students advocate for an interest in not just sort of what's interesting. I mean, this is true, I think, of a lot of different kind of domains that are related to identity, but whereas schools have had to provide disability resource centers or disability services or places for students to be able to access accommodations and make requests so that their learning environment is completely accessible to them, there's been a kind of parallel and like slower revolution or change in higher ed to integrate disability studies, right? To have a critical identity oriented thing where thinking about what is the way of thinking about the world and knowledge and the experience of disability and how that expands how we understand the world, what constitutes quote unquote normal, what's a life worth living, what does productivity mean,
Sure.
all those really cool things that disability studies opens up. And students are really, really, really more and more eager for disability studies and for a kind of disability justice oriented way of thinking about how everything's connected to everything else, and all the various identities and forms of oppression that relate to each other. And like Beth, I always think about, how many major social justice organizations and commitments you have, right? Because you understand so deeply the way that issues of poverty and racism and ableism and disability oppression and anti-Semitism and sexism, like they're all so related to each other.
Right.
I think that's becoming a really important way of understanding and thinking about disability in higher ed contexts. That's kind of fun to be part of.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about disability studies. What we try to do in this podcast oftentimes is to reframe things. And the last episode that aired on the radio station on WFMU was our disability magic episode. And we thought about, with our friend Galen, we thought about what does it mean for the people with the highest need to have the most power in a society? What does it mean for all of us to be able to live in a paradigm where the more help you need, the more help you get, and that's just the way the world works. Like a world focused on care, a world focused on complete experiences for more people, around the things that that they really think about for themselves on a daily basis, to make their lives better. And that's a really beautiful thing that you bring up disability studies, because I think that critical awareness of disability studies does have the power to shift those paradigms in a huge way. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the things you were just talking about also about issues of care and having the people, who sort of are living the most central experiences related to disability, having the most power and having that be organized around, like the world be organized around that group of people. I think that's a really powerful, like just in terms of what you were asking about a kind of vision, like to think about a vision of like real mutual care and interdependence, and I think that one of the things that I appreciate about disability framework and disability studies and disability justice is it exposes the illusion of independence and
Yeah.
individualism, right? Like
Yeah.
there's just like this kind of bull BS way in which we whatever, like a kind of quote unquote dominant kind of able-bodied person thinks of themselves as existing independently and doing things on our own or individually, and that is ridiculous, like I think like I mean I identify as a temporarily able-bodied person, and it's ridiculous to think about that I'm not dependent on the ingenuity and the labor and the creativity of so many other people and
Mhm.
machines and technology that make life possible. And so when you expose a certain kind of dependence in terms of certain kinds of disability, it just turns everything on its head, and it exposes the unreality, or the, like, I guess, like as Mia Mingus talks about, like, the myth of independence, right? It's a myth. There's nothing real about it. And
Yeah.
I just think like how like sort of disabled people are like punished or maligned or thought of as improper or unfit to like parent or whatever, right? And then we think about all these like hugely wealthy people who pay other people to parent their children, right? Like, like, I don't know how many heads of state have ever like changed a diaper. Like, you don't actually have to be able to do certain things in order to be a parent, but like we have these sort of double standards that I think are just so important to think about and expose. And so anyway, I would imagine a world where there isn't that kind of hypocrisy, and that people are really meaningfully value what it means to be in real relationship with each other and care for each other and know that we need each other and are deeply dependent on each other. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Beth, I wonder if you have any questions for Joan.
Yeah, did you get into this because you had known anybody personally who was disabled, such as family or friends?
Yeah, that is such an awesome question, Beth. And it's something I've thought about a lot. Because, I have family members who have disabilities. I wasn't very close to them. My dad's uncle, my great uncle, like had a physical disability, had one arm, and his daughter, my dad's first cousin, had Down syndrome, and various other people, would age into disability. But there was nobody in my family or in my friend group that I was very, very close to who had a disability. But for but I was really interested in disability. And in 6th grade, I was really interested. I mean, now I would call it being interested in ableism. I didn't have a word for it then, but I did this huge research project like in 6th grade about basically like non-disabled people's reactions to disabled people. It was like about reactions to the handicapped, which was the word in 1976 when I was in 6th grade. But I was very interested in, and I think the interest really came from my own social identities, like being this white, upper middle class Jewish girl. And there was so much pressure related to like appearance and achievement and perfection. And I just got really interested in what life would be like if it were not possible to look a certain way or function a certain way that I felt so much pressure to be expected to do. I don't know, that's my best guess of why I became super interested in disability as a young person. Subsequently, I've made lots of friends and but yeah, it's a fantastic question, Beth, and an important question, I think. I feel like.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for telling me that.
Okay. Thank you.
We also do ask everyone that comes on the show if they have any jokes.
Yes, you did warn me about this, which I appreciate. And I did think about my favorite joke. I have such a hard time remembering jokes. Like they don't stick in my mind. I don't really remember. I don't know. I have a terrible memory in general, but I'll tell you my favorite joke. Should I tell it to you now? Is this a good time for a joke?
Sure.
Okay. What do Kermit the Frog and Catherine the Great have in common?
Ooh.
They have the same middle name.
Wow.
Yep, that's the only joke I can ever remember. The middle name, the.
Cool.
Yep.
That's a new one for me.
Yeah. Oh, good. It's good to tell us a joke that no one's ever heard before. You haven't heard before. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. You were talking about lawyers earlier for a moment because we actually are featuring a TED Talk tonight on the episode that airs tonight from Haben Girma.
Oh, cool.
And I've been listening to her book. I would love to try to get her at some point on the radio show, but yeah, just I've been learning so much myself also, and really just trying to curate something that people really feel like they can be a part of, you know.
Yeah.
The theme music for the show is original, and so is all the music that goes in between the segments and things. So, and those are people that have come out of the woodwork to be interested in helping with this show. So,
Yeah,
so
cool.
it's been a really lovely experience so far. And we are getting going with a new space at the Ivy building in Minneapolis.
Oh, yeah, cool.
The Ivy for the Arts building, and it's called the Artery. And so our nonprofit Able Media is a part of the Artery. It's a group of about 10 or 11 or so of us that are going to be putting on events. We're creating a recording studio there and that sort of thing. So
awesome.
You know, it has 2 accessible restrooms dedicated to the space. So yeah, it's we're excited about doing more over there as well.
That's
and that's
really
at the
cool.
Ivy building. That's on 27th and 27th in Minneapolis.
Minneapolis is so weird in that way.
Yeah.
To be on the corner of 27th and 27th. Anyway, yeah. Yeah, the podcast is, I listened to a couple episodes. It's really exciting. And I'm not a podcast person, so it's kind of ironic that I'm participating in a podcast, but I love the medium, and I love the way that you're building out a kind of vision, and it's really cool. Yeah.
Well, I would love to geek out with you some more on disability studies, and probably at some point invite folks
Yeah, I
over
would
for
too.
some conversations or some kind of, we want to do some events that are specifically disability focused at the new artery space and everything. So just really want to feel like it's a place that can hold community in maybe a way that people haven't felt entirely from different spaces, public spaces in the Twin Cities.
Yeah.
For a while,
Sounds
maybe.
awesome.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Very cool. Really cool.
Beth, do you have any other questions for Joan?
Yeah, I was thinking of some other. Boy, I can't think of any other questions right now.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Joan, is there anything that you'd like to leave folks with from our conversation today? Any parting words for our listeners?
Well, I don't know. I'll just say that like some of the like research work that I do that is in the area of disability studies is really about non-disabled allies in the area of disability, and really interested in how people build relationships across like disability identity. And
Yeah.
so I think that these kinds of platforms and podcasts are super, super important, because like in the interviews that I do with people, like with, for example, disabled people about what they value in their relationships with non-disabled people, like what they're looking for, you know, in a quote unquote ally, or in work I've done with like deaf people about hearing people, really just like prioritizing the knowledge of disabled people and recognizing the, I don't know, like the limits of our own knowledge from a dominant point of view is like that it's limited, and that that non-disabled people need to do our work to learn from and about the varied and wise lives of disabled people. And so podcasts like this are awesome. That we can't like just like depend on a single person to like teach us something, but there's so much tremendous knowledge and wisdom and cool stuff out there. So I'm really glad you all invited me to be part of this, and that you're doing this project. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And thank you for bringing so much awareness to disability in your own work, and the way that you create relationships, and just the being a part of the fabric for at a college that long, you know, there's something really beautiful about that, I think. And yeah, and just having this conversation with you today, I'm just happily reminded of how brilliant it can be to be engaged in a project of higher education, you know, and how much revolution has come from those places of learning and those places of igniting so much joy and creativity and community, you know. So thank you so much for being on the show with us today. And I, for one, would love to have you on again for some further discussions.
Well, I would be totally honored. Thank you, Beth, and thank you, Matt, for inviting me.
Oh, you're welcome.
Pleasure. Yeah.
All right. You have a great night, Joan.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Have a good one.